I'm expecting more people to trickle in. I know we have a little situation with parking and road closures and everything. But we have an excellent panel here, and I think you're really going to find it very, very, very informative. So first up speaking is Gary Brown, who's from the New York State Attorney General's office. I think a lot of you know him because he has spoken to OSNE and Portland senior groups in the past. So I'm going to say, go ahead and take it away, Gary.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gary Brown. I work for the New York Attorney General's office, Attorney General Letitia James. So on behalf of Tish, I extend greetings to all of you this morning. My title at the Attorney General's office, and thank you, Catherine, for setting this up. My title at the Attorney General's office is on the statewide elder abuse coordinator. And the reason that position was created several years ago was a recognition that there are all these scams and frauds targeting older adults. And the recognition of that, for the most part, as you're going to hear me explain, we cannot catch the bad guys. And even more rarely can we ever recover the money. But these are preventable scams if we know how they work. So it's very important for our own protection that we know the latest techniques that the scammers are using to try to rip us off. If you're wondering how bad of a problem it is, back in 2011, the MetLife Mature Market Institute did a study nationwide to see how much money is lost to this type of fraud. And they came up with a number of $2.9 billion a year, which sounds like a lot of money, right? We knew that was a way lowball estimate. So in New York, we did our own study in 2016, and we learned that fraud victims are losing $1.5 billion a year in New York State alone to this kind of elder financial fraud. But as I said, these scams are avoidable if we know how they work, so that's what I'm going to focus on today. As I go through the presentation, sometimes I can tell from the look on people's faces, they're thinking, you know, anybody who would fall for one of these phone scams is stupid. I'm not stupid, so why do I need to worry about this? But what the scammers are trying to do really is not trying to outsmart us. It's not a matter of intelligence. They try to push an emotional button. They want you to feel fear or love or rage or desperation, something that then takes your brain out of the equation, so you're not really thinking things through. You're reacting based on the emotions that they've caused you to feel. So that's what it's really about. And as I go through these scams, I'm going to ask you, what's the emotion that you think people get when they get this phone call? And I think you'll find that it's pretty obvious. The most common phone scam we've ever seen in the history of the United States is the so-called IRS scam. The caller says he's an IRS agent, says you owe back taxes, and we're going to come and arrest you today unless you pay up. They then tell the victim to go to a pharmacy or a Best Buy, some store where gift cards are sold, to buy gift cards and call back with a serial number. Now, there are elements of this scam that really don't make sense, do they? For starters, does the IRS call you on the phone if you owe money? No, they'll communicate with you in writing. Do they tell you to pay your taxes by paying with a gift card? No, you pay with a check. And do they threaten you with same-day arrest if you don't pay? None of those things are true. But if you don't know that in advance and you get this call and the caller says, we're going to come and arrest you, it's a scary call. The emotion people are feeling is fear. And I think deep down, a lot of us are afraid of the IRS anyway, that we're going to get audited someday and be in trouble with the IRS. So this scam plays on that deep-seated fear. And you heard me mention that they tell you to go buy gift cards and then call back with a serial number. You may be thinking, well, we have their number, we can call them back, we can catch them. What they use is the callback number, something called a burner phone. It's a phone they buy that has no account associated with it. It just has a couple $100 worth of usage. So they use that burner phone for a week or two, they throw it out, they go buy a new one, and they start all over again. Most of these calls originate outside of the United States, which is why you'll often hear that there's an accent when the person's speaking to you on the phone. It's because common places where these scams call from are India, Mumbai, India is a hotbed of it, Nigeria, Ukraine, Canada, Spain. Canadians don't really have an accent, but the other places you'll notice an accent that's a red flag. So the IRS scam is incredibly common, and it works about 1 in 50, meaning about 1 in 50 people who get the call go ahead and send the money. And it's a low percentage, but when you multiply that by the millions of calls that they're making every day, it translates into many, many victims. And at the Attorney General's office, we hear every week from people who have gotten the call, some of whom have fallen for the scam. Now, as more and more of us have become aware of the IRS scam, they've changed tactics a little bit in the last few months. Instead of claiming the caller saying he's with the IRS, he says he's with the Social Security Administration, and that your number has been compromised. So the first thing they'll do is ask you for your Social Security number so they can confirm that the number they have is correct. And then they'll often also ask for payments and say that if you don't make payment by gift card, your benefits will be discontinued. And because this is a fairly new development, people who know to hang up if the caller says it's the IRS aren't so quick to hang up because the Social Security Administration is a different type of scam. And so people are falling for that one as well. Again, the Social Security Administration does not call people on the phone. They have your Social Security number. You don't need to give it to them. And there's no penalty or fee that you would pay. And if there were a penalty or fee, they would write to you about it. They wouldn't call you about it. And they certainly wouldn't tell you to go buy gift cards in order to pay. So those are a couple of the most common phone scams, but there are many others out there. And some of them use different emotions. The one that gets me the angriest is called the grandparent scam, where the caller says he's your grandson and he's been arrested in a foreign country and he needs you to send bail money real quick. The caller usually doesn't know the name of the grandson he's impersonating. So he'll start out by saying, "Hi Grandma, it's me, your favorite grandson," hoping that you'll answer and say, "Oh, hi Jimmy, what's up?" And then he tells you the story. I got arrested with some buddies, I was in Canada on vacation, I was driving back to the hotel, I got in an accident, when the police reported to the scene, I was arrested for drunk driving, and I need you to bail me out, Grandma. And then he'll say, "Grandma, shh, please don't tell my parents. If they find out, they'll kill me." And why does the caller say that? For two reasons. One is, he wants to isolate the victim, because if the victim calls her adult children, or the victim calls her grandson, they're going to know this is a scam. But also, you know that old expression, flattery will get you everywhere? It's flattering for a grandmother to be told by her grandson, who she thinks is her grandson, "Grandma, I trust you with my deep, dark secret more than I even trust my own parents." So it's making Grandma feel good on the way as he's trying to rip her off. Now, oftentimes, at some point, Grandma will say, "You know, Jimmy, it doesn't sound like you." Why doesn't it sound like Jimmy? Because it's not him, it's an imposter. He's got an answer for that. He says, "Oh, Grandma, in the car accident I was in, I broke my nose. That's why I don't sound like myself." Or he'll say, "They've had me in a jail cell for 48 hours with no food, no drink. That's why I don't sound like myself." He's always got an excuse. But if Grandma remains suspicious about whether it's really her grandson, the caller will say, "Oh, Grandma, let me put you on with my attorney. He can fill you in on the details." His partner in crime then gets on the phone. The attorney, the fake attorney, is someone Grandma's never spoken with before. So there's no voice recognition factor. And now he confirms the story. Yes, your grandson was arrested. Bail's been set at $3,000. And then to create a sense of urgency, he'll say, "If you can get me the money today, I can have your grandson on a plane home tonight. But if I don't get the money today, it's going to be 3 or 4 more weeks before we get back in front of a judge, and your grandson will remain in jail during that time." So imagine the kind of witch's brew of emotions that Grandma's feeling now. When she first gets the call, she's feeling love for her grandson. She's probably feeling a little angry that he did something stupid like getting arrested for drunk driving in a foreign country. She's flattered that he reached out to her at this time of need and not his parents. And she's feeling a witch's brew of emotions that makes it more and more likely that she's going to go out, buy the gift cards, and fall for the scam. And again, it's estimated that this scam works about 1 in 50 calls. So it gets me so angry, though, because it's a scam that uses the love a grandparent has for their grandson as the method of ripping Grandma off. So it's really an awful scam. And of all the scams that are out there, people are the least willing to admit to falling for this one than the others. And I understand generally why people don't want to admit they fell for a scam. They're embarrassed. You know, they feel stupid. But I gave a presentation like this a while back up in New Paltz. And afterwards, a woman came up to me, very well dressed, very well appointed. She pulled me aside and she said, "Gary, I fell for that grandparent scam. I sent $3,000. I said, "I'm very sorry to hear that." She then started hugging me and thanking me. And I couldn't figure out why she was doing that. So I said, "Why are you thanking me?" She said, "You're the first person I've ever told that this happened." I said, "Really? You didn't tell your adult children? You didn't tell your grandson?" And she said, "No. If they knew I fell for this scam, they think I'm losing it. It's time to put me in a nursing home or assisted living or to take over my finances." She said, "I don't want to let them know because I'm more worried about the loss of self-control that might happen if I tell them than the loss of the money, which is already gone anyway." Excuse me, but imagine how terrible it must feel to be a victim of a crime, which is what that woman was, and not feel you can tell anyone about it. If your car is burgled, stolen, you call the cops. If your house is burglarized, you call the cops. But if you fall for this scam, you're very reluctant to tell anybody because you're worried about the consequences of it. So it's a really devastating scam. And people who fall for that kind of scam, it really gets to them. It really affects their psychic and their mental and their physical well-being afterwards because they just feel so badly about it. There's a common scam where the caller says he's calling from Con Ed, a local utility company, and he says, "You're behind on your electrical bill. You owe us $800. If you don't send the money today, we're going to turn off the power and shut your lights." Now, of course, if you're behind in your bill with Con Ed, do they call you on the phone? No, they write to you. Do they threaten to turn off the power the same day? No. Do they tell you to pay by gift card? No. So again, there are elements of this that don't make sense, but if you get this call and you're worried about losing your power, you might fall for it. And I learned about this the hard way because my mom, who's in her 90s, got the Con Ed scam call last summer on a hot day in August. And luckily, on her way out to go buy the gift card that she told her to do, she called me. And she told me what had happened. And I said, Mom, that's a scam. You know that's a scam. We've talked about that. She was more hysterical than I've ever heard her in my entire life. She was hysterical. And she's screaming at the phone. She goes, it's not a scam. I go, how do you know it's not a scam? She said, they gave me a callback number. And I called Con Ed back and they confirmed that I owed the money. So I asked, well, was the number they gave you 1-800-CON-ED or some number like that? She said, no, it was a 917. So I said, Mom, you just called the scammers back and they confirmed that you owe the money. But Con Ed, you don't owe the money. And then I pointed out to her something. My son graduated from college in May of last year and he moved in with her. He got a job in Manhattan where she lives. He moved in with her. He lives in my old bedroom. It's kind of neat. And to defray some of the expenses of him living there, I now pay the Con Ed bill. She doesn't even get it. I get it. I pay it. So I said, Mom, by the way, you realize you don't even get the Con Ed bill. You don't even pay the Con Ed bill anymore. It comes to me. And she said, oh, you're right. I feel so stupid. But I said, Mom, it's not about stupidity. It's 95 degrees out, and you were worried about losing your air conditioning today. And you were preying on your emotions, and you tried to rip you off using those emotions. So thank goodness she called me before she ran and bought the gift cards. But it's a terrible scam, and it's very common. Other variations on it, the call will say, he's from the courthouse, and you were supposed to show up for jury duty last week, and you didn't show up, and there's a $1,000 fine. And if you don't pay it right now over the phone, we're going to come and arrest you. So they're acting as an imposter. They're pretending to be someone that they're really not in order to scare you, or make you feel love, or make you feel fear or desperation, in order to get you to go out, buy the gift cards, and send the money. So the gift card thing is a huge red flag. It's gotten so bad that the federal government has now made it illegal for a telemarketer to ask for payment over the phone by gift card. It's illegal. So as soon as someone asks you to do that, you know they're a scammer because a legal business would not ask you to pay by gift card. But the scammers don't care. They're calling from outside the United States. They're not worried about getting caught. There was a huge bust in 2016 of an IRS ring based in Mumbai, India. And imagine this was an office building there with like 300 people who report to work every day, and their job was to pretend to be an IRS agent, to call people in the United States and threaten them with immediate arrest if they didn't send the money. So this is one of the few times when the ring got busted, and for a few months we saw many fewer complaints about the IRS call. But by the following spring, the volume had returned. They just set up shop somewhere else, elsewhere in the world, maybe in India, maybe somewhere else, and the calls continue. So we need to be on guard for that. Romance scams have become increasingly common as more and more older adults are using the internet. If you're a widow and you go on Match.com and you post a profile of yourself, there are scammers out there waiting to see an older adult who posts a profile. They post a fake profile. They reach out to you. They pretend they're interested in meeting you. They start emailing and texting you all this lovey-dovey kind of stuff, and then after a period of time comes the ask. They ask for money. I broke my leg. I have a doctor bill. I can't pay any money. The business is failing. I need money. There's always an excuse they have why they can't come see you in person. I live in London. I live in California. I'm not from New York. But it's very, very powerful because the people who they're trying to rip off are lonely. And here's someone pretending that they're in love with them. And there was a case involving a woman who lived in Peekskill. And her husband died. And about 10 years later, she went on Match.com. She posted a profile. Some guy started calling her and texting her and emailing her and reaching out to her. Her daughter knew it was a scam. She said, Mom, this guy's going to ask you for money eventually. This is a scam. Don't fall for it. Her mother said to her, I'm finally getting some love and affection in my life, and now you're trying to stop me from enjoying myself. And the mother threatened to cut off the daughter, have no communication with the daughter unless she acquiesced. So the daughter felt she had no choice but to acquiesce. The mother started sending money. And at some point, she spent all the money she had, and she lost her home in Peekskill to a tax foreclosure. She didn't have enough money left to pay the taxes. So the mother had to move down to Philadelphia with the daughter, with her husband, with them. And so what they did was they put a strong password on the computer. They took away her iPhone and gave her a flip phone that didn't have computer access, so she couldn't get online. And what did she do? She went to the public library. She logged onto the computer there, and she tried to reach out to the guy again. And only because she didn't have any more money to send did she not send any more money. But she would have if she did. So it's a very powerful scam. And oftentimes families have to resort to self-help like this family did. Change the password on the computer, take away the cell phone, make it impossible for the person to communicate with the over the web. How many of you use a computer? Did any of you use a computer? Use a little email? Use a computer? Do you use email? So there's a common scam where you get an email, and the email says it's from your bank or the government agency, and they want you to confirm your personalized information, like your social security number or your password with the bank, but it's really not them emailing you, it's an imposter. And if you provide the information in response to the email, they're going to rip you off. So if you do get an email unsolicited, it's not in response to an email you sent to your bank. They emailed you and they want personal information. We recommend you not respond to the email. Pick up the phone, call the bank, speak to them on the phone. Now you're sure who you're talking to. And or go on your browser box or computer and type in what you know to be the actual web address of the bank, and then you can be on with them. There's a couple of other phone scams that are out there that we've seen. There's a tech support scam related to the computer. The caller says it's from Microsoft or from Apple, and that your computer is running slowly, but I can fix it for you if you give me remote access to your computer. And if you then give the person, they tell you what to do, they sit you down at the computer, they tell you how to give remote access, and if you do, then they put malware on your computer that locks the computer, and you can't get back into your computer unless you give them a credit card number. And that's become a very common scam. And what's interesting is that it's estimated that the grandparent scam, the IRS scam, and the utility scam work about 1 in 50 calls. The tech support scam works 1 in 6. And I'm not quite sure why that is, but I think the emotion that it generates is we all use computers, but we don't really know how they work. We rely on them, but we don't know how to fix them if our life depended on it. So when someone calls you out of the blue and says, I can fix your computer, I can make it run faster, it's tempting to go along with it. And so many people are falling for it. So what are some techniques you can use to stay safe on the phone? For starters, if you answer the phone and it's somebody trying to sell you something or get you to donate or whatever it is, hang up the phone as quickly as possible. It's not rude. You didn't give them permission to call you. You don't want those calls. Just hang up. They're the ones who are being rude by calling you and trying to rip you off in the first place. All the studies show that the longer you stay on the phone with one of these scammers, the more likely it is you're going to fall for the scam. So the sooner you hang up the phone, the better off you are. But even better yet, we recommend that you not answer the phone in the first place. Use caller ID as a screening tool, and only answer the phone if you recognize the number as being your son, your daughter, your doctor's office, etc. If you don't recognize the number, don't answer. Let it ring through your voicemail. If it's a scammer, they probably won't leave a message. If they do, you can simply delete it. If it's a legitimate call, you can call back. But by staying off the phone, it greatly increases the chances that you're not going to get ripped off. Sometimes when I make that phone, people say, Gary, I like to answer the phone when I get these calls. I stay on the phone for 10 or 15 minutes with the caller. I waste their time, and I go, you're not going to rip me off, and I hang up the phone. It makes them feel good. But it's a mistake, because these calls are all generated by a computer. And the computer can tell whether a live voice answers the phone. And if you do answer the phone, even if you jerk them around and go, and hang up later, the computer says this is a number to keep calling because somebody answered the phone. So the point is, the more of these calls you answer, the more you're going to get. Whereas if you never answer these calls, you can hope that eventually your number will fall off their list and they'll stop calling you. And I think we've all had the experience when you see this weird number that keeps calling for like 10 days in a row. If you don't answer it, it stops because the computer program is such that after 10 attempts, you can answer the phone, they stop. What they do to get you to answer the phone sometimes is they use a technique called caller ID spoofing. They can make your caller ID say whatever they want it to say. So if the caller is claiming to be with the IRS, they can make your caller ID say Internal Revenue Service or IRS, or the Washington, D.C. phone number of the IRS. The caller is claiming he's from the courthouse and you show up for your jury duty, you'll see a number from the courthouse. If the caller is claiming he's your grandson who got arrested in Montreal, Canada, you'll see a Canadian phone number. But it's not the real number that's calling you. It could be someone calling from anywhere in the world. But they use caller ID spoofing to make the call seem more believable. As more and more of us are not answering the phone if we don't recognize the number, they're trying to trick us by using caller ID spoofing. They do something called neighbor spoofing. They spoof a number that's in your same area code, in your same exchange, but with 4 other digits at the end. And what they're hoping you're going to think is that it's a neighbor, it's a local business, it's someone I know, and you'll answer the phone on that basis. But don't answer the phone unless you recognize the entire number, not just the area code in the exchange, but the entire number. It's called called neighbor spoofing. What they'll also do sometimes is they'll spoof your own number, and I have to admit I fell for this one. My cell phone rang. It was my own number on it. And I thought, well, gee, that's weird. Can you butt dial yourself? What's this all about? So I answered the phone, and it was a bank in Georgia trying to sell me a credit card. But what they had done was spoof my own number to get me to answer it out of curiosity. So if you see your own number appear on caller ID, do not answer. You can't call your own number. It's a means of trying to trick you. Now, not answering the phone is not a perfect system. Because occasionally you may miss a call you really want to receive. So for example, a few months ago, I have two cell phones, a work phone and a personal phone. And the work phone rang, didn't recognize the number. The other phone rang, I didn't recognize the number. And about 20 minutes later, I noticed there were voice messages on both phones. So I called them back, and it was the attorney general that I mentioned urgently to discuss the case. So it was about a 20-minute delay, and I did that. I called her back, and I explained why I hadn't been able to, why I didn't answer the first time. She laughed, and she understood. But it's not a perfect system, but for the moment, it's the best one we've got. There are also some call blocking services that you use where if the number that appears on your phone is associated with spamming or spoofing or robocalling, you hear one ring and then the call goes away. The most well-known of those services is called NoMoRobo, N-O-M-O-R-O-B-O. It's free for cell phones. It's $2 a month for landlines. And we put that on my mother's phone because when my son moved in with my mother, he told me, Dad, he said, Grandma's getting 15 calls a day from scammers. It's driving me crazy. So we put NoMoRobo on the phone, and now it rings once when it's one of these scam calls, and it stops, and everybody's much happier that way. So those are some alternatives that you have to try to stay off the phone, stay out of trouble, and stay safe. And it's particularly important that you do so because, as I mentioned at the outset, realistically, if you fall for one of these scams, you send the money or you get a gift card and call back with a number, we're never going to recover. It's virtually impossible. Even in that case in India where 300 people were arrested for running an IRS scam, the amount of money that was returned to the victims was zero, none. So these are preventable scams, and I hope the information I've given you this morning will help you stay safe in your daily lives and do's and don'ts about the phone. Catherine, I want to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, you need to answer some questions?
Sure.
So I have a question. So how does the list get generated? If it's a computer generated list, how do they generate it?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
They can buy a list. You can go to a service and buy a list of people over 65 with $100,000 net worth in New York State. So they buy them, they compile them, they sell them to one another, they trade them.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just dial every number in sequence.
Yeah.
So that no matter whether your number is listed, unlisted, landline or not, you're going to get these calls. Now, my mother's been in the hospital for the last couple of months, and so I've been answering all my phone calls because I'm getting calls from numbers I don't recognize, a doctor, a nurse, whatever. And so I've gotten in the last 2 months the IRS call, the Social Security call, the Con Ed call, the jury duty call, guy trying to sell me an extended warranty on my car, and a couple of credit card companies trying to sell me a credit card. And because I'm answering the phone, now I'm on the list of people who answer, so I'm getting more and more of these calls. But I don't have a choice right now. And businesses don't either, because the business doesn't know who's going to be calling them, so they don't really have the choice of not answering the phone if they don't recognize the number. So that advice doesn't work with businesses. Any other questions?
Do these scammers leave voice messages ever?
Sometimes they do leave a voice message. Usually they don't. If they do, just delete.
My daughter was saying that she's gotten something from an unpaid loan that she never took out.
Yeah.
But they did call her like 7 times this week, and she said to me, you know, is it possible that I could have forgotten or something? So I think they do play on your emotions, especially if you get a series of them. She's 24, so
Yeah.
she's not on a single list, but
There's an interesting study out recently that shows that seniors are more likely to fall for these scams than younger people, but younger people lose more money than seniors do. So there's risk out there for all of us. We're all at risk of these scam phone calls. And for example, the IRS call, they'll call anybody at any age. They don't care. It's not just seniors. The grandparent scam, they're looking for people of a certain age because younger people wouldn't have a grandson child. But for so many of the other scams, they're just calling everybody.
does anybody have any other questions for?
So, you know, I use the block color.
Use what, I'm sorry?
Block color.
Block call. Good. Good. Good for you.
My uncle can pray to, be a prize money for you. lotto. Or, you know, they knew that he played scratch and whatever. And they got his number, they told him if they had him send money so that they could send a large amount of money. You need to cover the cost of the wire is $500. Send us that.
You know, there's an element of greed in all of us. Deep down, we all want to be the grand prize winner. We all want to get the lowest price. We all want the best return on our investment. So scammers often try to capitalize on that. And I think maybe the best example about how these scams aren't about intelligence, the biggest con artist in the history of our country stole over $50 billion. It was Bernie Madoff. And who did he steal money from? Did he steal it from stupid people? No. He stole it from the richest, most sophisticated individual and institutional investors in the country. But he promised them double-digit returns at a time when if you put your money in the bank, you were going to earn very little. And the greed factor kicked in. But my take is that people like the Wilpon family who own the New
I
York
was
Mets
just gonna say, you ruined the mess.
Yeah, and the owners of the New York Mets baseball team were also fabulously successful real estate developers, could invest millions of dollars in Madoff's Ponzi scheme. My takeaway from that is any of us could become victims if we let our guard down in con artists because that's the right approach that might work for us.
That emotional edge, right?
Yeah.
Yesterday they called me from Connecticut. Why? You pay too much. I want to come down in your bill. I said, no, thank you. For my life, I be going to Connecticut. Don't go to no more.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's terrible. Now they call and the numbers is from here.
Right.
Right.
914-762.
Right.
And sometimes
Right.
I don't remember since my friend her cellular phone, and I answer because I think, oh, maybe somebody need me or whatever.
Yeah.
And you know, Chinese is what you don't understand.
And what about that? I remember this winter, especially, this winter drop off, there was a lot of international, people getting a lot of international calls from
Yeah.
like crazy.
What they were doing, Catherine, is they were calling from a foreign country
Right.
and not leaving a message. Usually they would hang up after 1 or 2 rings before you had the opportunity to pick up, hoping that out of curiosity you would call the number back. And there were these international calls that were very expensive, akin to a 900 number call. So a colleague of mine at work, her son felt that in terms of those calls. She got billed like $15 per call for the 1 minute until we realized it was a scam coming up. So unless you know someone in Estonia, if you see an Estonian message, don't return the call. That's a country that often claims to be calling.
No, but it's terrible. They call you.
Let us wait and block for,
I mean,
I
one thing,
don't know the number,
yeah.
block. 100 block.
Good for you.
So one thing I did on my phone too, honestly, more because of the ring to disrupt, is I have my setting that, don't ring if it's not my address.
Very good.
So sometimes I'll see that I've gotten calls, but it doesn't ring, so it doesn't disturb it during my workday, but also it's a way to sort of screen out some of those other things.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for the opportunity to talk this morning. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you, Dana.
Thank you.
And on behalf of the Attorney General,
Thank you.
Alicia James.
You to come for that meeting.
Up to date info on how the inventive people who are up to no good come up with new ideas all the time, right? That's part of the problem too, I think, is that all the scams are always changing, right? So that is, I think that is one of the things that we have to be on the lookout for, and also tell our friends about, because I think that,
Absolutely,
sometimes.
it's very important.
Because like you say, if people are embarrassed or ashamed or whatever, and they don't talk about it, then that gives more opportunity for people to talk
Last
about it.
week, I called the Social Security.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a scam.
Social Security, again.
Yeah,
That's the most common new phone scam, where the caller says it's with Social Security.
yeah.
I forget the letter. They send the letter.
Yeah, they always say,
They
IRS.
never call me.
Lately, I've been getting calls of unknown caller.
Right.
I don't know who I know.
So, thanks for identifying yourself as unknown, right?
I will catch on. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We have to be very vigilant. And I
They
think
said
also
they're
not be embarrassed, to say, because I think we really do have to keep each other. Yeah, keep each other up to date.
So, and
Thanks
Thanks.
very much,
Have a great day,
Charlie.
everybody.
we have a Okay, last presentation, we have with us the Commissioner of Westchester County Planning Department, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the 2020 census. I know that we've been talking about the importance of the census for a couple of months, but there's some particular things about the 2020 census that we want you to know and tell your friends about. So I'm going to introduce Norma Drummond, the Commissioner of Planning from Westchester County. Thank you, Norma.
Good morning, everyone. It's almost afternoon. Good morning. We're actually going to start with, I'm going to introduce Dr. Owen Gorder, who is a community partnership specialist from the Census Bureau himself. So he's going to talk about the bigger picture of the census, and then I'm going to talk about what's changed on the census, why we're worried, why you've got to let your friends know that the census is coming, and things of that sort. So we're going to kind of tag team with each other a little bit, but Owen's got a tighter schedule, so I'm going to let him go first.
Well, hi, everybody. The census is pretty straightforward, right? We have to count every single person in America, where they are, when they're sleeping on April 1st. That's for every single person, where they are, in the right place. And we do that in a couple of ways, right? This year, you might not get a paper form in the mail. We hope you're going to be able to work with OSNING to go do it online. You can pick up your phone and call people in English and Spanish and a lot of other languages. You can do it on paper or people will knock on your doors. Most people are worried about two things, and that's what you just reinforced. One is that it's safe. It's very safe. You don't open your door to anybody unless they have one of these that says they're from the Census Bureau, right? And when you give them your information, it's completely confidential. No one can see it. When the census people come to your place, if they do, no matter what you have in your house, they can't report. So let's say you're taking care of your 6 grandchildren and they're all packed into your house and you don't want anybody to know. We can't tell a soul. We don't report to social services, we don't report to housing, we don't bother if you're on Section 8 or your benefits. We are not interested in any of that. We have 9 simple questions we want you to answer, and we're finished. And we can never talk about that the rest of our life. We all take an oath that says, okay, for the rest of your life, you go to jail, and you have a huge fine if you repeat anything you heard or saw when you're doing the census. So that's really important for people to know. Sometimes they're nervous about, people have very complicated lives, right? So it's confidential, we want you to be safe, and the last thing we want is we really want you to talk with your neighbors and friends. It's really, really important that you, now that you're going to have a lot of information from Norman and a little information from us at the Census Bureau, that you talk with your neighbors and say, this is an important thing to do. And tell your sons and daughters that they have to count their children too. Because the people most likely to not be counted are kids under 5 years old. So your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren have to be counted too. And we don't care how many are in the house, it doesn't make any difference to us. What we want to know is you have to every person once in the place where they're sleeping on April 1st. And if people are living in a facility, they get counted separately. If they're in the hospital, they get counted differently. So we really, and Norma's going to tell you how important this is, right? It's a lot of money. And it supports OSNING, it supports the senior center, it supports Meals on Wheels, it supports Medicare hugely, right? Without the census, nothing happens. And this is really, really, really important. So I have some material over there for you to take home if you want. And I'm not going to take up Norma's great time because her speech is so cool. But if you do have any questions before I go about this census stuff, before I leave you.
So I have a
Yeah.
question. So I know that for most people, the expectation is that the census will be done online. For seniors who aren't as computer literate, what's the plan to reach out so that we make sure we count all of our schools?
Well, sure. So through Norma and through the town of OSNING and the village of OSNING are very active in this. We have committees that are going to set up ways to actually help seniors get computers with people helping them to answer. So you don't really have to be computer literate. The other thing we're going to do is there's going to be a phone number that you can just call and talk to somebody and answer the census on the phone. In English, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in French, in Italian, Haitian, Creole, all those languages. We have all the languages covered. So if you have a neighbor who doesn't speak English, but they speak, Thai isn't one of them on the list, but Italian for sure, they call up and they can answer the census right on the phone. They don't have to use a computer. But Norma and her committee have a great plan in place to be sure that the seniors are really able to get to the computer and answer, and then nobody has to knock on your door and everybody's safe, right? So if you do it before we come knocking around to your door, you don't have to worry about opening the door to anybody. So, any other questions? Yeah.
So, we were just here an hour ago hearing from Gary Brown at the New York Attorney General's office about all of the scams and whatnot.
Right.
And how is the Census Bureau working to help differentiate the actual census collection from a scam? Because I imagine there might be scammers out there who use the census to...
I think that is a great question, and I can't tell you the particulars. But unless it has a shield,
Yes.
and unless when you go online, there's a certain way you're going to be able, the only way you're going to have, it's going to be based on your address to answer, and you don't open your door to anybody who doesn't have this. It's the best I can tell you right now. I can tell you that there's hundreds of people working on that whole scam, like buying other domains, fake domains, and all of that stuff. The people from all county, government, federal government agencies, and the private sector are all working together to make that as safe as we can. I can try to find out more for you, but that's the best answer I have.
But if somebody calls...
Nobody calls, we don't call you.
That's important to know.
We don't call you, we don't ask for your social security number, we don't want your driver's license number, your INS number, none of that stuff. Nothing. We never ask those questions. Thank you for asking that. We don't want your credit card number, none of that, nothing. That's your private information, don't tell anybody. Hang up on them.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Great question, thanks for asking. Well, thanks everybody, we're about the important part.
Can everybody see my screen well? Or do you want to move to the other side of the room? That's all I want to be sure.
That's okay.
That's okay. Because it's a lot more interesting to look at something than looking at me sometimes, all right? So I'm so glad that you're here, because the more people that get information about Census 2020 and April 1st of next year is going to be so important. So we're hoping that you share the information when you leave here. So let's start with the fact that the census is mandated by the Constitution. The Census 2020 is actually the 24th census that the United States is conducting. The first census was done back in 1790. So this is not new. It happens every 10 years in the United States. But for some people it will be new. For some people, it's the first time that they've had to worry about filling out their own census. But it does affect, it's important for multiple reasons. Number one, it affects how many members of Congress will represent New York, so that certainly is important. But it also affects how billions of dollars are spent from the federal government. And I'll go into that a little bit more a little bit later on, but it definitely affects how much money comes to Ossining, how much money comes to Westchester County, etc. It is used certainly for the village of Ossining and the town of Ossining's eligibility for grants. Like some of you may have heard of the Community Development Block Grant Program. We helped actually to make some of the renovations to the pool many years ago here with the CDBG program. We've done sidewalks all around the village with CDBG. We're doing some water improvements. So we use CDBG around as well. So the eligibility for that grant will be very important. So this is a picture back from the 1940 census, but I grew up with 8 brothers and sisters, so this could have been my house, because the old census forms only let you fill out the information about 10 people in your household, and there were 11 people in my household. So we always had a census taker that had to come to our house and collect the information on that last person. But one of the important things we want you to know this time around is that this is gonna be the first census, where you're going to get an invitation in the mail with a code on it to respond online, rather than getting the form sent to you through the mail. In 2010, you got the census form sent to you in the mail, and everybody just filled it out at their house and then mailed it in. This time around, you don't have to worry about mailing it in, because you're not actually going to get a form unless you haven't responded to the census with the first couple of mailings that will come to you. So for folks who have maybe for 6 times now or 5 times you've responded to the census in paper, you will not do that this time around. That will be important. It's also important for you to know that if you don't respond, one of the first things that will happen starting around the middle of April is that one of the census takers will start knocking on your door. And that's when Owen said you have to start worrying about making sure they have ID. But if you don't want somebody knocking on your door, the important thing would be to try to respond to that census when you get it. And again, you can do it online, you can call somebody on the phone. You can actually, if you still have to go online to print out the forms. And then if you live in an apartment building and you haven't responded and nobody answers your door, then the Census Bureau does have the authority this time around to talk to your building manager and to talk to your neighbors about how many people live in your unit. And that's all they're looking for. They need to get an accurate count of how many people live in every housing unit in Westchester County. It's just so important. Lastly, they will have the ability, the Census Bureau will have the ability to get information from other federal departments, from HUD, from Social Security, but they cannot go the other way. The Census Bureau is not allowed, they are sworn to confidentiality. They cannot share the information that they collect with any other federal agency. So the Census 2020 has 9 questions. It used to have 10, but it has 9 because the citizenship question, the court has now decided that the census is not allowed to ask the citizenship question, whether you are a citizen or not. Doesn't matter. And by the way, that question has been asked in the past, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't, frankly, we all probably come from somewhere else, so. But I just also want to make sure, because some of you may have been contacted by the Census Bureau or may continue to be contacted, that the Census Bureau runs other surveys. They do other surveys. They're in business every year. It's not like they just come into being just for the census every 10 years. So every month, they send out almost 300,000 questionnaires to households looking for information. If some of you remember the 2000 census, not even 2010, the 2000 census, 1 in every 10 households got a long form questionnaire. You got a lot more questions to answer, but most households, 9 out of 10, just got the simple 10 questions. That long form questionnaire was replaced with what they call the American Community Survey. And so now what the Census Bureau does is every single month, they mail out a questionnaire to almost 300,000 families across the country, hoping to get responses. And that collects a little bit more income information, it collects a little bit more information about really what's happening beyond just the simple how many people are in your household. So again, the important thing is to know that you may actually get 2 census questionnaires at the same time. You may get one that's the American Community Survey, but realistically, everybody's only just going to get the letter inviting them to respond to the 2020 census. So I'm going to start from the beginning about helping you understand census geography, because this helps you understand how confidential your data is. If I were to leave the community center and if I go to the right, I go down the hill, making the next turn, I don't remember the name of the street, make a right. Well, this might not be a good example, but eventually I'll come back to Route 9, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll make a right, and I make another right on to come to the community center. That is a block.
Yeah, you can go
I can't
now
go
because
right.
it's
That's what I said, this is the greatest example.
Yeah.
You know what I mean. If you leave your house, if you go to the right, you go to the end of the corner, you go to the right, you actually know what the block is, right?
Yes.
So one block is all those homes that are within that area. One block.
One block.
So somebody who lives across the street from you is not in your block. they're in a different block. So right from the start, it's gonna be difficult for people to understand whose information is which household. Because the Census Bureau never releases information at that block level. Because honestly, in some areas where there might be some industrial or commercial, there might not be a whole lot of people living there. So they don't release any data at that block level. The lowest level of data that gets released is at the block group, where they take that block and it becomes one of a larger area. And that's because what they try to do, a block group has an optimum size. The best size of a block group is about 1,500 people. But it has anywhere between 600 and 3,000 people living in it. So that when you're one of 1,500 people, how are you going to be able to figure out what your household is? That's the idea. It's to protect your confidentiality. So the block group, like our CDBG, a lot of the federal grant programs, that's the level of data that we look at. But remember, the person who lives across the street from you is in a different block. In a different block, but now they're in a different block group. All right, so you never know how those block groups are going to line up, when you're completing the census. After the block group, the next level of census geography is census tracts, and many of you have probably heard of census tracts. And so every county has its own numbering system for census tracts that starts at the lowest part of the county and works its way north. So the census tracts in Westchester start from the Yonkers and the Mount Vernon and the New Rochelle area, and the numbers work their way north so that the higher numbers are in the higher part of the county. How many census tracts do we have in Westchester?
Under 200, it's 100 and
Okay, so it's close to 200.
60 maybe.
Okay. Ted is our census planner, by the way.
Aye.
So one of the things that the county planning department had to do, by the way, the county planning department is a census affiliate. So we are regular users of census data. Ted spends every hour practically of every day using census data for something. He's either helping nonprofits, he's helping the municipalities, he's helping us with reports on different things, because there's so much data that gets collected by the Census Bureau, and we tend to do things like data. We use data a lot. So anyway, so that's really what Ted does regularly. But to prepare for the census, Ted and one of our other staff actually spent last summer, the summer of 2018, helping the Census Bureau review addresses. We had to make sure that every housing unit had its own unique address. So if somebody's living in the basement, but not in the rest of the house, we have a specific address for the person who's living in the basement. If somebody's living over the garage, we had to make sure that that unit had its own address. Because again, you're going to get an invitation to respond, and each housing unit will have its own code to respond with, so that the Census Bureau will be able to track who has responded and who hasn't, only for the purposes of where do they have to send somebody out, okay? So at the end of last summer, our staff reviewed 370,000 addresses in Westchester County. There are 370,000 housing units, what we found.
Wow.
One of the reasons I, as Commissioner of Planning, am concerned about the count is because officially there are only 345,885 housing units in Westchester County. We found 24,000 more addresses than there are officially housing units. Now, one of the things that led us to do was look to see why were there so many housing units that the Census Bureau didn't know about. And in fact, we found that a couple municipalities in Westchester were not reporting their building permits correctly. So we're now actually, Ted's been doing trainings around the county to all the municipalities to help them learn how do they report their building permits. So hopefully we won't have this issue 10 years from now. But we all know there's always turnover in the local municipalities, and that's what tended to lead to most municipalities, oh, I was supposed to do that, So anyway, there's 24,000 addresses more that we found versus what the Census Bureau was aware of. The next thing that we had to look at was we actually had to verify for the Census Bureau where the boundaries were for every municipality. I'm sorry to keep moving on you here.
It's okay, no worries.
One of the things that we found, and on the left here, on the left is the city of New Rochelle, in the middle is the town of Mamaroneck, and on the right is the village of Larchmont. The blue is, if you can see the blue line, that's where the Census Bureau thought the boundary lines were for the municipalities. The real boundary lines are the white lines. So the Census Bureau even had some of the boundary lines wrong, which meant that this whole block in Mamaroneck town was being counted as if it was there were people living in the city of New Rochelle. And these two blocks, or these 2 rows of homes in Larchmont were being counted in Mamaroneck town, and Larchmont was losing out. So one of the things that Ted and the other staff person did was they actually had to review all the boundary lines for the county and advise the Census Bureau of the errors that we found. So hopefully they're going to make those corrections. This might be a little harder to see, but one of the important things I want you to know is the Census Bureau started working on the 2020 census in 2011. All right, as soon as 2010 was done, they started working on 2011. Because you don't just have people start responding on a computer until you've developed all that technology. And obviously there were lessons learned from the last count in terms of, we missed a couple people. One of the things they found last time around was children under 5. I think, Dr. Border mentioned that. Children under 5 were one of the worst counted groups. We think it's because they're not in school yet, so mom and dad might have thought that they weren't important to count yet, but they are in fact important because the schools don't just look at this year's enrollment. The school is looking 3 years from now, do I need to build a new school? Or can I shut down the school, honestly? So the understanding that children under 5 is going to be so important. Again, helping people understand that message. They have to count every person in their household. Is going to be really critical for us. So again, the Census Bureau they started years ago working on this. We were doing updating material for them last year, and so now we're to the point where they are actually, they're in what we call an education phase right now. They're trying to just get it in people's head that the census is coming. We are less than 6 months away. We're just over 5 months from Census Day. April 1st of next year is Census Day. All right, our plan, our hope, is to be able to get to every senior center next February or March, because you're going to get these letters in the mail, and we want to make sure you know what to do with them. And like I said, you're not going to get that form, and so many of the seniors have been used to all these years, they got a form mailed to them. So one of the things that we've mapped out is, how we're going to do that. The Census Bureau itself will actually start collecting. They're going to actually start, no, not yet. No, the Census Bureau itself will start they will actually start going out to the rural villages in the state of Maine and the state of Alaska, because think of all these people that don't even have internet access. They have to go out and physically count these people. So they will actually start their counts in January. So this is just an overview for you that 95% of the households in America will get an invitation to respond rather than getting the electronic form. 5% of the households are actually going to get somebody coming to their door to actually complete the form. And then 1% is really those that are going to be done by, well, I guess that's the actual number that will be counted by the census takers. So the one will actually get the, they're really hoping 95% of the population will be able to respond electronically. The one good news about responding electronically is that as the responses go in, we'll be able to see the data in real time to see, this census tract has a low response rate. Why? What's there? And so we'll be able to respond in more real time about what do we do, how do we boost up the efforts in that specific area to be able to get a better count and make sure people know what to do. So important dates for you. Don't worry about these, I just wanted to have you be alerted to them. The Census Bureau on March 12th is going to be sending out the very first mailing. And that mailing will have, remember I told you Census Day is April 1st. So March 12th is the first mailing. Now you know why I'm going to want to get to the senior centers in February. Because I want to make sure everybody knows to watch their mail right around March 12th, March 15th, that area, the first mailing will go out. And that first mailing will be a letter. And in that letter will be a code that is for your housing unit, okay? Each household will get its own code. And you'll be able to take that code if you have internet access and a computer at home, if you have a smartphone, you'll be able to take that code and respond right then and there. You can call the Census Bureau and respond by phone. If not, we're going to be working with all the local libraries to make sure, and even the senior centers, any place that has public computers, so that we can make sure that you can get help responding if you need to. Somebody can set you up with the computer so that you'll have the ability to respond. If you lose your letter and you lose your code, don't worry. You will still be able to get identified when you put in your address. They will still be able to identify you, but it is important to the extent that you can to use that real code that you get. Now, if you don't respond after you get that first letter that goes out on March 12th, on March 16th, the Census Bureau is going to do mailing number 2. And mailing number 2 is also a letter, okay? But then on March 26th, you're just going to get a postcard. Now, how many of us get the mail every day and just throw out all those postcards? Is it somebody selling you windows or lawn treatments or, you know, who knows? So anyway, that's the important thing is we want people, if you don't, by April 1st, you'll have seen 3 mailings already. And we don't want anybody to be just disregarding them and throwing them out, which is why it's important for us to get out and let everybody know. If you haven't responded by April 8th, then the 4th mailing that the Census Bureau will do will be to actually mail you the questionnaire. Okay, so if after 3 mailings you haven't felt comfortable responding by telephone or going to a computer and responding online, you will in fact be sent the form, and then you'll have the opportunity to complete the form and then mail it in. All right, so that's mailing 4. Hi. Technically, you will have until the end of July to respond to the Census Bureau's mailings and to respond, to get your information in there. But if you haven't responded pretty much by the middle of April, the census takers are going to start coming to your door. The Census Bureau is hiring in the Westchester area. They're hiring over 6,200 people to help them count people. And they are looking to hire people from every neighborhood in Westchester County. They don't want to just bring up people up from New York City or have people come from Albany to count. They want people who know the community. So if any of you are interested, you're welcome to apply for the jobs. They're paying $21 an hour. They want people who have flexible hours, so they want people to be able to get to people when they're home, which is nights and weekends. So they want people who have the ability to be able to get out and work on nights and weekends. But you do have to have a car, by the way. You have to be 18, and you have to have a car. All right. So to prepare for the census Bureau did what they call a Census Barriers, Attitudes, and Motivators Survey 2018. They also did it 10 years ago. But they just asked some questions. Are you going to respond to the census? If so, why not? If you are going to respond to the census, if you're not going to, why not? If you are, what would motivate you to respond? And so they asked some basic questions, and I want to go through them with you so you understand again why we're a little worried about the response. So they sent out 50,000 surveys across the United States. 50,000, and only 17,500 people responded. Okay? Yeah, not even half of the people responded to the questionnaire. So that worries us to begin with. Well, one of the first questions they asked was, how familiar are you with the census? And
family.
Huh?
How many are in the family?
They just asked, how familiar are you with the census? 79% of the people who responded said they were familiar with the census. But that means 21% of the people who responded didn't know what the census was all about. That's a lot of people in the United States, if it's 21%. So, but it's good to get a handle on exactly how many people. Wait, did I miss something? No. Okay. Let me speak to this slide. So in 2008, they actually conducted the same survey. And in 2008, because they do it 2 years before the census, to get a sense of what the response rate is going to be. In 2008, they had a response rate of 86%. 14% of the population did not respond, said they were not going to respond to the survey. In reality, 24% of the population didn't respond to the survey. So it was 10% greater than what their expectation was, okay? In 2018, the results of the survey said 33% of the population was not going to respond to the survey. If you add another 10% onto that, that means 4 out of every 10 people are not going to respond to the census. And that would be really devastating for places like Ossining, but it would be devastating for all of Westchester County. So then we asked the question about how much information do you know about the census or how familiar with it. Then they asked the question, if you're not going to respond to the census, why not? I don't think there's any surprise here. Apathy, they really couldn't care less. The concerns about their confidentiality, distrust of the government, fear of repercussions, what is anybody going to do with my data? And then the last one is, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? What's the benefit to me of responding to the census? But they did also ask, what would motivate you to respond to the census? If you knew that funding, the census was used to get funding to hospitals and healthcare, would that make you respond? If you knew it was to get funding to fire departments, to schools, would that help you respond? And that's what people said. 94% of the people who responded said that if they knew that the information was being used to get money to hospitals and healthcare and to fire departments, that would encourage them to in fact respond. If it got 92% said if it's going to improve our roads, I'll respond. All right, we all we don't like those potholes in the roads. So if it means more money for roads, that's a good thing. 85% said if it means more money for the schools, we'll respond. Okay, so it's important for us to know that because it helps us in how do we link people with understanding what the census does. One of the things that we're going to be working on at the county level is we run the county bus line. We run Beeline bus service. Beeline, along its many routes, we have 300 and some odd buses, and but we also have a whole host of shelters. Not every bus stop has shelters, but there are a number of shelters. And so what we've looked at is where are the shelters where we would have the greatest response on the census if we put material there about the census coming and an ad there about the census coming. Take care. Oh, sorry. So one of the things that we were able to do was map where the hard-to-count areas are, where the areas are that did not have a great response rate. You're very welcome.
I missed my doctor's appointment, so right now I'm getting a headache from the heat.
You want me to walk you down?
Once I get to the door, I'll be all right. Thank you very much, appreciate your help.
No.
I need my walker, I'm trying to get one downstairs and I thought I did.
Right. I get it.
So I don't have any.
They're not going to ask that question anymore, so yeah, not to worry. All right.
I'll go. You wanted to take
I guess it's
Thank you very much for joining us today for the Ossining Senior Forum. We learned a lot of information about how to protect yourself against scams and why the census is important and how to take care of yourself. I'm Legislator Catherine Borgia. Thank you very much for watching.